That's fine.
No. Okay, good afternoon. Let's get started. We only have a 1 hour slot and a pretty full agenda. This is the Think2Think research group. And actually, when I prepared these slides, I reused an old slide and it still said proposed research group. And this is our first meeting at an IETF as a chartered research group. So this is IETF, but the note well still applies. So in particular, please have a look at the IPR guidelines of the IETF, which are essentially identical to those of the IETF. There's a blue sheet going around. We have note takers. We have a Jabber facilitator, the mailing list, and we have this habit of putting up GitHub repositories for our meetings. So if you want to look at the agenda, for instance, you can do that at the GitHub repository or as usual at the Meeting Materials Manager. Our agenda is pretty full. This is a summary meeting, so we are not going to really do work here at this meeting in this hour. But of course, we are very interested in getting feedback from people who have not been part of the process so far. So I will talk a couple of minutes about the status of the research group. Then Ari will talk about one of our deliverables, the RESTful design document. Mohit will talk about one of our other deliverables, a secure bootstrapping survey document. Then maybe we can talk about outreach and cooperation with other organizations briefly. Matthias will have a short talk about interaction models and hypermedia controls. Then we can have a short discussion about what we might be able to do in the area of schema interoperability. And at the end, we can look at future meetings of the research group. Okay, so let's just start with the overview of the research group. The research group is relatively new, so I'm going to say what it is about. It is about making the Internet of Things a reality. Internet of Things is a term that is used for many different ideas, not many of which actually contain an internet. And why is internet technology not used more for the Internet of Things? There are some stumbling blocks, and we have to work on those. This is really the idea: find out where those stumbling blocks are, and maybe find ways of clearing them. And in particular, those ways that might lead to IETF standardization. And of course, there are so many things that belong to the Internet of Things. For instance, people belong to the Internet of Things, but we are mostly looking at the layers from the adaptation layer up to the application layer. And that includes management and security. What we have done so far, we have had a number of meetings before we were officially chartered, and those were co-located with IETF meetings, but also co-located with W3C meetings. W3C has an interest group called Web of Things, so they are looking at using web architecture for Internet of Things applications, and it turned out to be extremely useful to co-locate with them and have joint discussions. And right after we were chartered, we had another one of those common meetings with W3C and Nice, and later in San Jose, we had a short meeting that was co-located with an IAB workshop about semantic interoperability. We have 3 documents that we have designated as deliverables right now that are in progress in various stages. We'll talk about 2 of these today. One is only just now being started, being worked on. The other ones I already talked about, REST and secure bootstrapping survey. And finally, last but certainly not least, what we have done is outreach to other organizations. So for instance, in San Jose, we have met with Bluetooth people, and we had a joint meeting with OCF, the Open Connectivity Forum, and Foundation, I'm sorry, and with W3C, so we could start to understand what those various organizations are doing. Maybe a quick peek into what we will be doing. Of course, the work that I just described continues. We are looking at having meetings at real academic research venues. We kind of have neglected this in the first year because there was so much cooperation with other standards organizations that was necessary to be able to do something in this space, but that's certainly on the list. And we also want to co-locate with open source activities. And there we will have an opportunity in Berlin, right in front of the next IETF. There will be a summit of the RIOT community. RIOT is a research operating system for the Internet of Things, and they have a very vibrant open source community. And finally, while we already have worked on benchmark and reference scenarios, we plan to formalize this work a little bit more and maybe have a 4th deliverable document by the end of the year. You wanted to say something? Yeah.
Juan Carlos Zúñiga. On the collocation of future meetings for the July, is it that you're planning to have that one meeting and not one with the IETF in Berlin, or is it a double meeting? Or
the RIOT Summit is right in front of the IETF at the same place. I mean, it's not in the Hotel Intercontinental, but it's also in Berlin. So that's the idea, that people who come for the IETF can go there, but also people who come for the RIOT Summit can go there.
Excellent, thank you.
And by the way, the RIOT people are going to do their usual barbecue thing in front of the IETF, so you want to be there in any case, even if you don't care about this. Okay, that was a very, very quick overview, and I think we should go to content for a little bit, and I'll hand over to Ari.
Thanks, Carsten. So I will give a very brief overview in 5 minutes on the current status on what we are working on, called RESTful Design for Internet of Things Systems draft. So we've been working on this now pretty much a year or so, and the goal of the document is that give guidance for designing IoT systems that follow the REST architectural style. And as you know, those RESTful systems that you see out there, a lot of them, or basically all of them, use a lot of technologies that have been developed at the IETF. However, sometimes the use is innovative, at least, and sometimes violating even many of the basic principles stated in the RFCs. So the idea would be to collect some of this guidance across various sources, RFCs, etc., put it in one document that you could be able to easily to give someone who is designing these systems, designing APIs, designing services, and they could at least get the basic rights. Also, the idea is to collect terminology there, so we have a common language of discussing these things, and have really key piece of information and pointers to details. So this document is ideal to be something short, which really focus on IoT, have a few examples, be quick and easy to read, and then you have a lot of pointers where you can find more information. So where are we now? We have the second version out about a month ago now. We got a lot of feedback on the previous version. It was presented, for example, in the Web of Things group. I was presented in the RG group, and also shared with some other organizations. So we added there quite a bit more terminology, because there were some terms were still missing and some were maybe not at all that clear. And in particular, two issues around idempotency and application state that seem to be confusing in this page. They were clarified also in the draft. And then we got a couple of questions. So what is really the difference when it comes to IoT in a RESTful system? And really there isn't quite often that humongous differences there, but there are a few key differences, for example, in data formats that you may want to have more compact data formats that are in particular machine readable compared to human readable. And some of the interaction patterns are often different when it comes to IoT scenarios compared to other RESTful systems. So those three issues were the main clarifications of the current version, but we still have at least three key topics that we want to discuss more in this draft. One is resource and media type design. So how do you go about designing your problem as resources, as media types, as interactions, and also hypermedia driven applications. So how do you use links and forms, etc., to really design your application? But Matthias will be discussing that topic more soon. And finally, we'll aim to have there some design patterns. So there are, of course, common problems that occur when you're doing such systems, and we'll create the simple ways of solving those that have been proven useful in various contexts. So unfortunately, this is a way too short slot to actually discuss any of these open issues, but I recommend you all read the draft. Reviews and comments, as usual, are very welcome. And also, we would like to hear from the community, from you guys, and also from organizations that you are working outside of the IETF. So a lot of these things are, of course, quite well known at the IETF, but maybe outside of IETF in other organizations, some of these principles are not that well known. So if you can discuss this document, see, okay, here's guidance, what we think makes sense right now, and also getting back information, what else is that you're struggling with? What are the key questions you would like to have more clarification, and let this document help. So that would be really part of making also other organizations here aware of this document. So really read, comment, and spread the love. Okay, thanks. I guess we have a minute for quick comments and questions.
Quick comment. As a terminology thing I always struggle with, that the definition of REST is that all state is maintained in the client and not in the server. But in some IoT environments, highly constrained environments, state is maintained in the server as well as the client, with actually minimal data transfer. So a lot of stuff is basically flying in the face if you say this is going to be RESTful, and if you really look at the definition of RESTful, it's not RESTful. So are we just kind of fuzzing the words around here, or we're saying that these systems just are not RESTful?
I guess I will defer that question to Matthias, who's our expert on this topic.
Yeah, we had a discussion on this during one of our calls anyway. So usually the way is in REST, it says, yeah, that's resource state that's on the server side. That can also be modified, and it also is part of the overall state that we have in our application. So for instance, I had a problem with this application state definition, because it's not only what's in the client. If people who didn't read this think, yeah, application state should be the whole thing. So what's on the client and also what I changed on the server. So we have to make sure, should we stick to this, what is written in the thesis, or should we use something that is common language right now? So, and there was a lot of development recently, and we haven't gotten enough feedback actually which way we should go. So apparently you recommend to go with what people, or the language people use right now, and use this, right? Okay, I see a nod. So I think this is good input.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I recommend, so we have now one definition of the whole application state issue in the draft, but that is really, we've been going back and forth on what do we think is the right way to go. And as Matthias was saying, more input is more than welcome. So Bob, please, and everyone else too.
Yeah, I was actually getting to the mic to say, like, it might be useful to define what you mean by REST, and I think the comment that Bob just made sort of reflected that, have that in there. If you have it already, then I missed it. The other thing, sort of for the basic communication, like everything is fine and everything is pretty uncontroversial, I think. But then there are all these other aspects that we stumbled upon, which was topics like you trigger an action and the result doesn't come back immediately. These type of things. Do you discuss them in the document?
The events are not really discussed yet, and that's one of the things we've been planning to add more text about. So, and unfortunately, I guess we're already over time, so we can't go much into details right now.
That's really unfortunate.
Yeah, but yes, that's something what we have on the agenda to these events and interaction models to have more discussion on those. It's not, there isn't much yet.
Yeah, and also I think some of the other things that were discussed in the context of the publish subscribe that Michael Costa has been working on, where Carsten, you referred them as the Buddhas. I still like that term. And also with the notion of sleeping devices, and some of those requirements that come from the IoT world that are not necessarily it's not necessarily immediately obvious on how to map them to the REST design. I think those would also be interesting to discuss there, because that's where things get interesting, right?
I think that's a valid point, and that would maybe go into the design patterns part, because we're thinking writing something along the lines of, okay, this is your problem, and quite commonly ends up in a funny result. What would be a better kind of way of doing that? So I think sleepy nodes would fit in that pattern. Okay, thanks. But I guess we have to move on.
Yeah, I think I would summarize this as the objective of this work is not so much to define what REST is. There is a nice PhD thesis you can read about that, but to find out what can REST bring to the table for the Internet of Things. So what is the right way to use REST? Maybe even to give up some of the principles if we find out they hurt us in some places, or to add ones if we find out we need them. So REST will not entirely emerge unchanged from this exercise. Okay, one other document that we are working on is a survey document. So we're trying to collect information about how secure bootstrapping is done, and more.
Good afternoon. I'm Mohit, and I will be presenting our draft on secure IoT bootstrapping. And to give you some context, in the Yokohama meeting, we looked at the security considerations draft, and we had this general feeling that IoT bootstrapping is kind of very important, and there was sufficient interest in the group, so we decided to move it to a separate document. And one of the first challenges that we faced is, how do you define secure bootstrapping? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and this is the definition we came up with right now. So it's the process by which an IoT device in an IoT network securely becomes operational at a given location and point of time. So the goals of secure bootstrapping can be many things. It can be authenticating a pre-existing identity or creating a new identity. It can be for authorization for network access. I see Hannes on the mic already.
You want me to start now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Where did you get that definition from? So at least it's not the OMA definition, and it's not the OIC OCF definition.
So this is from the security considerations document that Sandeep was working on.
But I think it just confuses if you introduce another definition that none of the other documents use, but with the same term.
It's from the security considerations document. So I'm reusing what was there.
Yeah, but the security consideration document isn't that an individual document that didn't go anywhere?
The research group has decided to work on it as one of the contributions.
Yeah, but you can change things.
Sure, I'm welcome. Please feel free to suggest a new definition on the list. I'm not hard bound to this definition if you feel there's something missing.
I just want to reuse one of the existing definitions, or something that's closer to what these other guys are, because otherwise you would be reading other documents, use the same term, but completely
Please send it
different.
on the list. I'm happy to incorporate. So going back, so the goals of secure bootstrapping, it could be for authorization of network access. It could be for creating these groups or domains. And of course, for pairing one IoT device with another device, or pairing one IoT, securely pairing one IoT device to a cloud service. And this definition is kind of very broad, but it's on a purpose because IoT itself is so broad. So for me, IoT is not just sensors, it's any, even smartphones. And if I pair smartphones over Bluetooth to exchange files, that's also part of secure bootstrapping. And the second example is connecting sensors to the cloud backend from where they receive security or firmware upgrades. So we try to categorize these methods or classify these methods so that it's more structured. And the first is managed methods, so where the general assumption is that you have pre-established trust relation and authentication credentials. And managed methods can be centralized or federated. To give you an example, if you look at EAP, if you use EAP, PSK, or TLS, you have a AAA server, but you could also have something like EduRoam, where you have a federation of servers. Sorry for the typos, but some other examples, Kerberos, vendor certificates, and of course, OMA has a bunch of ways to bootstrap devices, but all of them fall into this managed category. So the next category we identified when we started looking at these bootstrapping methods was this P2P or ad hoc methods, and here the assumption is that devices don't have any pre-established credentials, and you typically do an unauthenticated Diffie-Hellman exchange, and to prevent the man-in-the-middle attack, you have to use out-of-band channel. So the previous example of pairing smartphones over Bluetooth or using Wi-Fi protected setup. If you were in SAG in the previous session, you might have listened to the talk about using OOB with EAP. Moving on, then there's the opportunistic or leap of faith methods, and here the point is not so much as the initial authentication itself, but rather to check that the same initial identity is used throughout, so the kind of the continuity of the identity or connection. And some methods might assume that the attacker is not present at the initial setup. So if you think of SSH leap of faith, that is one example, but of course send and CGA and just signing up on Gmail is one example where you sign first and then Gmail just checks that you are the same person every time you go and log into Gmail or Facebook. And of course, most methods actually use some components from managed and ad hoc. So that's why they are hybrid. And categorization is not always easy or clear. And choice of bootstrapping method heavily depends on the business case. So as Hannes pointed out in the SAG meeting, of course, business cases governs what bootstrapping methods are used most of the time. So what kind of third parties are available and who wants to retain the control or avoid the work done. And of course, why are we doing this? It's to learn the design assumptions and trade-offs. Our goal is not to review all the existing bootstrapping methods and prepare a 100-page document that no one will ever read. And instead, we want to help IoT application developers to look at the document and decide what's suitable for them. And end of life and rebootstrapping is actually a very complex topic. So if you have been following the news about the Revolve Smart Hub and how that has been bricked now, it's actually quite tricky, and we would like to actually have a discussion on that in the document. So you're welcome to contribute on the list. I think that was it. Yeah, any questions?
Yeah, sorry, the last slide doesn't contain a pointer to the document, but to another also very interesting document. I think what Hannes said points out that one important thing that was not on the slides is that we need to work on terminology. That may be another thing that we may want to intensify, because there are so many terms in use. And if you talk to Internet of Things people about commissioning and things like that, they all have very different ideas of what that is. Okay, so these were two of the three documents that we are working on right now. I want to quickly talk about the outreach component. I already said that we did a little bit of work there. So what's the point? The point is that we actually want to do mutual education with other SDOs in this other standards developing organizations in this space. So we want to educate each other about the way that other body works. So we want to understand how OCF works, and OCF wants to understand how we work. But of course, we also want to know what are the interesting products they have. What are these already doing? How do they fit into the overall picture? And how are these completing the picture or maybe raising additional research questions? That's really the reason why it's a good idea for a research group to have these outreach activities. So as I said, what is ongoing and pretty close cooperation is the one with the W3C interest group on a Web of Things. That interest group is very much in the process right now of chartering its working groups. So we will start to interact with their working groups as well. We have had one meeting with the Open Connectivity Foundation. Now I have it right there. And we probably want to increase the involvement. And that's a typical example for a problem we have there, because they kind of have been working in a bunker for a year, and then at some point came out with a specification 1.0, and then finally we could find out what they were doing, and maybe places where we might have had useful input if they had asked us earlier. We have had some discussions with Bluetooth. Bluetooth, of course, is an interesting connectivity technology, but Bluetooth also has some application layer components that are very interesting to interface to an Internet of Things environment. Now, these are just three organizations, and there are about 150. We're probably not going to cover all those 150, but I would very much like to hear from you. Are there any other standards developing organizations that you actually work with? I know Rob Moskowitz works with IEEE, for instance. I think we know what IEEE does, but still, there may be some interesting places where we may want to increase our contact. So those people in the room that work with another standards developing organization, please come up to the microphone now or come up later to the front and tell us what you would like to improve in the interaction with the IETF.
Yeah, my name is George Karagianis from Huawei. I'm active in several SDOs in IoT area. One of them is an alliance, the Alliance for IoT Innovation, that is actually promoted by the European Commission. And actually I have promoted the Thing2Think-RG there, but maybe it would be good to also have a presentation, say a formal presentation from the Thing2Think research group into IoTI. Other SDOs that are currently active in IoT, and Huawei is very much involved there, is the one M2M SDO, and also the OCI Alliance. So if there is interest, then I can also try to get, say, contacts and have also a cooperation with those.
Okay, that's good. It's particularly good if we already have people in the IETF who know what these organizations are doing, so we can find out what are the right channels to use. So we certainly will talk about that some more. Anybody else who has an idea which SDO might be useful to talk to?
Dave Robin, I would be remiss not to mention BACnet and ASHRAE, which is a NC accredited SDO and an ISO standard, so, which is a huge chunk of the commercial building automation market. I should also mention a competitor and say that KNX is also a very large protocol in this space, especially KNX makes small devices, which are kind of goes along with that IoT idea. I don't know if that would count as an SDO to you, it's an industry association, but then there are others like Red, and of course, you know, they're coming from the home automation. And even new ones created daily, like Fairhair, which is lighting and building automation for KNX and BACnet interoperability. But I have to mention first just ASHRAE and BACnet as being the main standard in the building automation space.
Thank you. Christian?
It's Christian Groves. At the IoT Semantic Interoperability Workshop, there are a number of organisations there, and one of the papers I submitted was a survey of the various efforts around IoT data models and things. So that referenced the organisation the previous speaker mentioned, and quite a number of activities. So I think that paper may be picked up in the repository of the wiki that we're working on as a result of the workshop. So that may provide a guide to organisations we can talk to.
Pat Thaler, I'm Vice Chair of IEEE 802. We have an active coordination effort with the IETF through the joint IEEE 802 IETF leadership coordination group, and which I also co-chair. And we have a fair amount of work going on in IEEE 802 relative to things. Not so much IoT, but network of things, you know, basically, since we are at layer 2, areas like addressing and quality of service for the time-sensitive networks, which of course is related to the DetNet working group, which I co-chair here. So yeah, I don't think there's much overlap, but there's certainly a need to coordinate for the things we do. It's becoming more likely, I think, that many of the small things, for instance, won't have a global MAC address necessarily, where because that would run through the address space much too fast, and also it's just a manufacturing headache when you're manufacturing things like light bulbs and sensors that to give everyone a global address.
Thank you. But it seems to me that we already have a pretty good working relationship with the IEEE at the IETF. So we probably should work a little bit in finding gaps.
Right. We have a good relationship. We maintain a coordination list to keep track of any issues that arise that seem to particularly need coordination. I don't think we have as much of a relationship with the IRTF end of things potentially, and so I'm not sure what's needed to get that looped in, but yeah, we have a very active coordination effort.
Hi, I'm Subitas. I just want to ask a question, then I will give you one organization where I am affiliate, I work with. When you say the joint meetings with W3C IoT, what exactly is basically happening, and what's the goal also in the outreach and cooperation?
Well, in the W3C meetings, of course, first of all, everything that is on the previous slide, understanding how the other group operates. But we also found a number of common areas of work, in particular in the areas of information models and interaction models, where it is very good to have the different perspectives on the system come together. And I think the mutual input already has had significant influence on both organization's point of view on these things.
Yeah, so I do participate with Zigbee Alliance, but I cannot speak for the Alliance here. But I think they mentioned yesterday about the semantic, the data models where Zigbee Alliance participated, right? I don't know, but I don't believe there is any liaison with IETF and Zigbee. But just a data point, I can take an action item and talk to that, organization. And this members meeting is happening in June first week in Amsterdam. So I can basically, be in touch with you, and like if there is an opportunity, sometimes other organizations, they come and present what's going on. If that is one of the objectives also, right? Because it's happening in Europe, and this IETF work activities can be presented. That could be one, action item. But I can definitely check with that with the organization and get back to you because I don't believe there is any liaison with IETF with the BLM.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I just said we had a. Christian, you want?
Yeah, just a follow-up thought. In terms of outreach, have the chairs thought of contacting sort of a couple of influential IoT blogs and talking to the editors and putting it out there that people interested in this IETF work could contact you?
You.
Hi, Samita Chakrabarti. So I think I just have a few questions. The outreach cooperation, is this something a part of the charter of this working group? Or
yes.
Is okay? And is this something we, like other working group in IETF, for example, DetNet, 6LoW, 60, we can take advantage? How will the process work then if we get to know about other SDOs technologies and their deployment? So usually, I guess T2TRG is the right place for those kind of collaborations. And then are you planning to connect to the relevant other IETF working groups if there is any relevant topic that we should know?
First of all, I think we are pretty good connected to the IETF groups that are working in the IoT space. So I think we have that. Of course, the idea is not to replace the IAB. The IETF has a defined liaison model, which involves the IAB, where we need formal relationships. And of course, most of the useful work is done in informal relationships by people who work in both organizations. So we're not trying to change that. We're just trying to have a little bit more of a high-level discussion, more at the architectural level that often is hard to initiate with other organizations.
Okay, yeah, and that could be the first entry point when probably further relationship can continue.
And I could also comment on the working groups versus the research group. As our charter says, the things that are in our scope are the ones that have potential for standardization. So if standardization is already happening in a working group, of course, that's a natural place to discuss some issue. But if there's some issue another SDO is working on that is currently not in many of our working groups, then an RG would be a natural place to discuss that. And then, of course, we will be forwarding people to the right places when we see the connections.
Well, I've answered one. You asked about other organizations you might want to check into. You might want to look at the Geospatial Organization Consortium. Do a lot of data, but sensor webs and things like that.
Right. So looking at the space that the research group spans, we probably won't do application-specific data models. So we are not so interested in what exactly is a light, or how do you define the color space of a light. There are domain-specific organizations who do this very well, and our job is probably more to find out where are these organizations, how can we collect information there, than actually doing the work with them. So there's kind of a limit to the number of organizations we can talk to at any specific point in time. But it's really important to know about it. Okay, I think it was a bit optimistic to do this segment in 6 minutes. I'll hand over to Matthias for the next segment.
Thank you, Carsten. So semantic interoperability requires self-describing interaction models. That was a position paper that we handed into the IEB workshop on semantic interoperability, kind of summarizing a part that is, or part of the work that is going on in the T2TRG. And yeah, so in general, it was well accepted that there are information models required for interoperability so that you can make use of the data that is produced by the IoT devices. This is mainly about the what does it mean? Our position, or that what we try to accomplish, is that we also have a model that is machine readable to describe the how. So how can machines actually access this information and describe this in a good way? And so what we've found out so far, it's quite straightforward to include descriptions for this on the server side, but then the consumption of these descriptions on the client side is really hard. And also for programmers, finding the right abstractions is hard, and that's why we often ended up with hard-coded interaction models, and we don't have this kind of machine-readable, flexible interaction model. So why do we actually need it? We need it to handle change, and it's specifically interesting for the IoT because we will have devices and things that are out there for decades. So the basic idea is we can interact or can bind two things together. So a light switch can work with a light bulb. And we also want to replace this with new things so that they can control alternative things. At a later point, we want to add new things that can also be controlled, but we also want to make sure that these kind of new things work still with the old things. And the critical thing is we actually also want that the old things can work with the new things that actually are designed later. And for that, we need kind of an interaction model that more describes how can you use these things and do not hard code it that it just works with the two things we know already. So to summarize, for semantic interoperability, of course, we need the information model. So this is describing the information that is exchanged. For that, we need some vocabulary so that we agree on, that we know the meaning what we exchange. There's some connection to the W3C what working group. They try to have a semantic model rooted in RDF to have these kind of descriptions. And we are working on the interaction model. So describing the possible interactions that also needs vocabulary. So there's quite a similarity here. And we, in particular, want to use look into hypermedia-driven applications. So what comes from the hypermedia as the engine of application state constrained from REST. So how does it look like? A quick summary, how our approach looks like. So we compose things or model things from multiple resources. So yeah, resource model in REST. And then we have these atomic interaction steps, so request, response, exchange that shape the processes, how the whole application should work. And of course, in hypermedia, we use links and forms to describe how a machine can formulate these requests. And we need some vocabulary, so these rel types, so link relation types and form relation types, to put some meaning. What does it mean to invoke this interaction right now, actually? And because the server can publish these links and forms during runtime, we also can influence something at runtime when something is happening. So here's a nice illustration of the whole thing, what is going on. So the idea is that the client gets an entry point for the whole thing, an entry point URI. Often this is in core, for instance, pointing to a resource directory. It could be your Google search engine. And from there, we follow links. So we get a couple of links back, we select the right link, and we follow it. And from there, we follow again links. So this could be on the same resource, on the same thing. It could also point to other things. The second component is we, in these documents, we also learn about forms, so we can invoke actions. And we submit the form. It could create a new resource, but it also can produce something like an action result if we process something, for instance. And this pattern continues. So the only thing we do is follow links and submit forms, and those need to be described to formulate the whole process that is going on. So sometimes what you see is you have to follow a lot of these links, which might be inefficient and so on. So there are a lot of optimizations that are possible. One obvious here is to use bookmarking that is known from the web. So once I found the exact resource where I constantly want to get the sensor reading, I can bookmark this and interact with that one and just read it out, so I don't have to have all the discovery process every time. And the nice thing is, because we can publish this at runtime, we can decide at a later point, hey, we need a new mechanism here at this resource. We, for instance, want to have some access control there, so we can redirect the link and insert during runtime a new kind of process step, and this way handle change. And the challenging part, we want to look into how to find the programming abstractions for that. Another ongoing work is about, okay, how do we convey all this information? So here's a draft by Klaus Hartke to have a more concise representation of links and forms. It leverages CBOR to encode all this. But there's also a more generic work going on. So what kind of links and forms do we actually need for the IoT? So the summary is we want to achieve semantic interoperability with this, where handling change is a high objective. Of course, we need information models for that. There's some relation to the W3WAT working group. So we have these joint meetings because they want to build this information model. And we focus on the interaction model with this hypermedia-driven application approach, which we also, by the way, try to establish at the definitions at the W3C, so that this is kind of the benefit. We think this is useful. They hopefully also will see this is useful, and then have some alignment across different standardization organizations. So what is also happening in this work, defining these scenarios. So for once, we have the reference scenarios that are also in the charter. Those more describe the requirements and challenges we have. And then we have the so-called plug rest scenarios. They actually work on implementation. So that's where you can come, bring your prototype, and we see if we can interoperate and if the whole approach actually works out. And then, of course, we provide building blocks that can be used. So like these machine understandable links and forms. So Coral is a current approach there. And yeah, other building blocks that you basically need to implement this kind of scenario. Carsten, do you have a link to the repository on GitHub where there's more information? Because this is the quick summary. If you found something that is interesting, I think it would be good to find all this. Yeah. And a lot of pieces are also open source, so you can start to play around. And we are definitely looking for more participants for the plug rest. So if you find this is interesting, please start implementing this, send mails on the mailing list, and yeah, come to the plug rest and shape how we actually solve this or try to solve this.
Thank you. I hope now that the terms information model and interaction model mean a little bit more. The problem we are running into is, of course, that the world is complicated, and there are lots of things out there, and there will be many things out there that have some characteristics that we need to operate on in these information and interaction models. And there was a workshop a couple of weeks ago organized by the IAB under the term semantic interoperability. And one hypothesis that was formed at this workshop is that there won't be one schema that describes the world. I mean, there's a project, Psych, you might have heard about, that is trying to do the schema for the world, but it's kind of difficult. Worse, there's probably not even going to be one language we're using. Different domains are using different ways to describe the world. And however, to build systems where we have lots of things communicating with each other, things that are coming from different domains, we need to bring this in some form together. And of course, many of these things are way beyond what we are doing in the IETF. However, we need to interface to these things. So we are very interested in technologies that can be used to collect this information, to integrate this information, in particular also to translate between different modeling languages. And just to give a peek into what we did in San Jose in that workshop, now that's your usual, you have n things and you need to translate between them picture, and so you need n square minus n translators. And that's the future of the Internet of Things. Well, maybe there is something that can be put in the middle and that can serve as a hub. Yeah, this will be hard to form, and most likely it will not be one such red star, but there will be a number of them, and they will differ, for instance, in the amount of data loss you're getting when translating from one schema to a different one. But it's also important to think about two different levels here. We can translate data from different data models. So a trivial example, of course, is we have a temperature sensor that generates Fahrenheit temperatures, and we want to know that information in Celsius. We also need to be able to translate the models themselves in the first place. So there is something that says this is the Fahrenheit-based temperature sensor, and we want to use this same information at a different place that is using a different model to describe the same information. And it's not just about information, it's not just about sensors, but it's also about interaction. So we want to have effects on the real world, and these effects often need to be actuated through interactions, through multiple steps. Before my coffee machine can make a coffee for me, it needs to know the strength of the coffee that I want, and so on. Looking more closely, it actually turns out this is an area where we, of course, have lots of prior work. So just in the information model space, we probably have three layers. We have the information model layer, we have the data model layer, and we have something like a serialization. And of course, each of these layers has about 10 different terms that are not entirely compatible with each other. So just taking in the existing state of the art is not trivial. So what we need to find out is how far can we get here? Can we maybe even build little systems that demonstrate some capability? What are the limits to the translation? Because there are always things getting in the way, and usually what is getting in the way are security issues. So one of the next things we want to take up is looking at this very wide field and find those areas that the research group should be taking up. Research that we should be encouraging. That's one of the things a research group can do. Just describe the challenges that we are having in such a way that researchers can go ahead and work on these challenges. And then, of course, find that research and take it in to this organization again.
Do you want to hear an answer to that?
Pardon me?
Do you want to hear an answer to that question?
Yes.
Okay, good. So what I would like to see is if someone could look at some of the popular standardization results and try to actually create the mapping between the different data models. There would be challenges. First, because some of the organizations haven't actually written down their data model in a machine readable form, so it would be they have to extract it from a specification. Some did, and then one has to go through sort of figure out how the mapping could look like and to see whether that actually works. I think that would be really encouraging. As a secondary step, some of the, well, not some, I know of one example. The All-Scene Alliance guys had sent me a link to the Microsoft Visual Studio Express plugin where they use their described information and communication model to then generate code that is sort of like as a wizard, which was, I thought was pretty cool. But I haven't seen any others. But then once we have this first exercise of the map, we could potentially automatically generate code from one to the other, or can use the results that have been worked out and then do that more automatically, even for gateways. That would be very interesting. I haven't seen that work, even trying to do the mappings. At least I cannot point to anything like someone who had tried, let's say, the lightweight M2M object model to the OIC one or something else. But maybe if someone of you knows, I would be really interested to look at those results.
Yeah, people have been translating ASN1 to XML and things like that. So these mappings exist, but yes, it's not exactly.
Can I use JabberScribe prerogative and jump to you? On JabberScribe, and I want to get back to that. Just to respond to that, the comments at the IATC workshop, I actually agree with. I don't remember whose comments they were, but that you can generate code for stubs for any two things, but you actually have to write code to do the mapping, because if the data models aren't automatically compatible, you actually have to write the conversion code. So I don't think you can do that. And that was just a point that was brought up at the IATC workshop that I think there was general agreement on.
In response to that, I remember that as well, but I think it was set in a context where it was mentioned of, for example, the Bluetooth SIG low energy work, where they use not a RESTful style, but instead just an RPC-based mechanism, and there's no formal description of how the interaction works. You actually have to read through the specification to figure this out. So that has some inherent limitation where this obviously doesn't work automatically.
A lot of this information is buried in hundreds of pages of PDF specifications of some interface. Yes.
Just a quick reminder, we have 3 minutes left of session time, so if you can keep your comments short, thank you.
Okay, I was going to plus one Hannes's comment and then make a similar comment to Ted, but I think at the IoT workshop we also had discussion about what we term as atoms, which were certain compatible elements between all the data, different profiles and data models, and then these could be put together to form sort of molecules or more complex systems. So I would encourage people to have a look at the slides around that too, because I think that was a really helpful sort of discussion we had at the workshop around that.
Yeah, since it's on the same topic, Matthias Kovac, I would say generating code is not new, and I think it's even pointless. It doesn't help if I have to reprogram my device to make it work with a different kind of device, and if there's another one, I have to reprogram my device again. It doesn't help in the whole interoperability.
Mike Amundsen with CA Technologies. I would just say that interoperability should only be at the message and nowhere else. We shouldn't concern ourselves with anything behind the interface. We can be interoperable in message format, and that includes the semantics, because that's the hard part. But what happens behind that, we should not know about data models or anything. They should be separate. Thanks.
In response to what Matthias said, yeah, there seems to be some controversy about what the different goals, and some people believe in some of the goals, but not in others. And I definitely agree with you that the stuff that you previously presented has obviously more powerful concepts in there, but unfortunately there's all this body of work that has been done in the past that people are using where your stuff hasn't been done yet. So the question is like, how do you deal with that part? And that I think that's where these things come in, I believe.
Dave Robin again. This slide says, what should we be encouraging? And one of the things that is difficult, as Dave Taylor just said, about there's code for the mappings. In other words, you can have all the semantic tagging in the world, but if the fundamental modeling constructs are different, then you can't match them up without some human interaction. For example, units is either a flat list of enumerated units, or it's like powers on the fundamental meter, time, lumens, et cetera. I mean, completely different ways of expressing units. That's not something that can be matched up by semantic tagging. So what I'm suggesting with that is not woe is me, but that a good research topic would be to look for these, like design patterns. Look for these mappings that will have to be hard-coded. And let's create a list of these mappings that are needed for the IoT space. And then we can all hard-code these mappings. And then with proper semantic tagging, I can find, oh, you have those kinds of units. I know how to translate it into my new enumeration over here. Otherwise, we'll never have any kind of automated mapping unless we identify those things and code for it.
And a good example of that is IEEE 11073, which has a lot of data modeling, a lot of data modeling work which has been done, and it's really dependent on what they're dealing with there. That's for mostly for medical devices. But if you look at what they've done there, it's really much what can you get over the net, get over the media and so forth. And that may be one example to see of how challenging it can be.
Yeah, I think each of us has their favorite information model out there. Of course, the IETF has Yang and the management model, so we have some first-hand experience with that. So I think I have to close down this particular topic, but send your info to the list. I really want to hear it. So I want to spend the last -2 minutes just quickly saying what are we going to do next. So the meetings that we are going to have actually need to cover these different areas. I have one question. Who in this room is a professor? André, Laurent? So I think it would be really useful to discuss about ways to get academic researchers involved in this. So if you can talk to me after this segment, I would be really interested. So we're going to meet in Berlin in the context of IETF 96. We probably also will use the W3C meeting in Lisbon at the end of September for another meeting. And we are looking at good ways to use the Seoul meeting. So if you know of some activity in Korea around the time of the Seoul IETF meeting, please tell me about that so we can plan around that. And finally, I would like to make a quick announcement. One of the problems that we are having is software updates, and Internet of Things devices need to be updated, or you have to throw them away. Now, there are lots of people who are doing that. So it's at first sight, it's not a research problem. But then if you look a little bit closer, there are a lot of things going on around software updates that raise new questions where maybe the existing mechanisms don't quite work. So the idea is to have a workshop in June to discuss these new issues or extended issues around software updates. How can the future Internet of things avoid getting obsolete every 3 months or something like that? So I think we have used our time. So thank you for coming, and see you on the mailing list or at the latest in Berlin.
Okay.
And I would like to have the blue sheets, please.
Yeah, thanks. And if you haven't signed the blue sheets yet, please sign them on the way. Is anything else?
5 minutes over.
So where are the blue sheets?